So leader, founder, chief organizer, Patriot Front, nationalist American organizer, professional activist in a sense, and lover of history and our heritage, seeing as we are a part of it and actively perpetuating it, not just making it, but also learning it and perpetuating it as well. Back to you, Eric.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so we will move right ahead here. Thomas will actually facilitate this meeting, as well as giving the kind of thematic introduction, and it's a huge topic. I'm looking forward to it, so take it away, Thomas.
It is a huge topic. We're going to be going over a lot in this episode. It's probably not going to be satisfactory to delve into every single issue. So if you're somebody who really wants to dive into one of these issues in particular, you may have to do some research elsewhere. But this is all stage setting. This is all stage setting, the realm of Europe, while we get to the birth of the European race and its ethnogenesis in America. So as we begin, America is at this time in our story and has been for countless millennia. Current anthropologists are still debating how long. The uncontested hunting grounds of innumerable tribal bands of Indians. Some of them are nomadic, some of them are sedentary. Virtually all of them, for their entire history, are Stone Age civilizations. They largely lack the written word, complex systems of agriculture, and so on. They have been squabbling back and forth over these lands, which would one day be called America or the Americas, endlessly into their largely unwritten racial past. That is clouded in myth and superstition. In many of the histories today, we only know through vague legends. Yes, and there is a lack of concrete architectural feats, as you will see in the Old World. And again, Stone Age civilizations go back thousands of years. We don't even know how long. People have their theories. That is where America is right now. Unbeknownst to them, in all their wars and legends and superstitions, Europe has begun to wake from the slumber of the Middle Ages and spread its wings across the world. After the fall of Western Rome, the power vacuum was filled by tribes, which in turn became societies, societies which became kingdoms, and kingdoms which became nations. This process incited the development of the national consciousness as we know it. Europeans became Frenchmen or Englishmen throughout this period in history, no longer, say, Burgundians or Kentishmen. This more centralized culture and system of government, where kings were able to finally leverage power over many decades and even centuries away from the feudal systems of petty dukes and princes, paved the way for more daring and decisive acts that only a more centrally organized and greater resource controlling state can make. As well, this incites greater competition between these nations, which demands more centralization, and it becomes a feedback loop and leads rise to absolutism, which later Americans have issue with, but that'll be a later episode. And we see now that ancient history became medieval history with the fall of Western Rome, as we just discussed. But medieval history becomes modern history with the fall of Eastern Rome in Constantinople. So when that happens, trade in the Mediterranean through trade routes along the Silk Road to the Far East made cities such as Venice, Florence, and Genoa into notable powers in the pre-Columbian period. This was fueled further by the Renaissance, which was in essence a resurrection of classical antiquity brought into the heart of a thoroughly Christianized Europe. So you had a sort of synthesis of the pagan classical age of Europe injected into the very modern Christendom of Europe. After the fall of Constantinople, which was, of course, the last outpost of the Roman Empire, the Ottomans and a lot of the texts from this classical age fled eastward or westward into Europe, and that was brought to Italian scholars and students, which also helped to revive Latin as the lingua franca of Europe. It grew out of simple ecclesiastical circles and grew into being the de facto language of scholars. The Ottoman Empire, riding the high watermark of Muslim territorial conquests into Europe, imposes control and high taxation on trade routes to the Far East. The wealthy nobles and aristocrats of Europe, who had grown very accustomed to the fabrics, spices, jewels, and trinkets from the mysterious lands of the Far East, such as Persia and China, they had a fascination begun with these goods going all the way back to the Crusaders when they returned from their crusades in the Holy Land. They now must look elsewhere for these goods, which creates a number of economic motivations. The printing press has been invented in this period of time, instigating a vastly wider flow of information across Europe. This is not only science, literature, discoveries of explorations, but also scripture is made available to the masses, which creates a number of religious and domestic and civil pressures on the societies we will talk about further. The compass and the astrolabe, likewise, are made available, and many naval merchants in their mastery of the coasts of Europe and the Mediterranean. Advancements in sailing technology allow vessels to sail closer into the wind and learn more about trade winds and trade routes. Trade routes trace the Horn of Africa and the far routes to Asia. The propagation of gunpowder weapons gives Europeans an unmatched advantage over more primitive adversaries the world around, which is the only kind of adversary Europeans happen to find themselves in contact with in this age. The New World is discovered, and with it, the transfer of power. There is a global power transfer between the Mediterranean powers to the Atlantic powers, where some may still argue that it rests today. It is important to realize how massive this shift in geopolitical power was. Where once European civilization revolved around the city-states of Venice, Florence, and Genoa, for example, it is now the nation-states of Spain, Portugal, France, and England, which are poised to lead the race. Not only the race into the New World, but the European race as a whole. Alongside this geopolitical and social realignment, long-lasting religious institutions have been upset by the Protestant Reformation. The governments of Europe struggle to maintain consensus and civil tranquility among religious sects. The settlement of the New World, especially by the Anglo-Saxon race, would outweigh the internal and internecine wars and European conflicts of the previous 1,000 years in global significance. The Roman poet Horace once wrote about Virgil, who braved the sea to Athens, that one must have, quote, oak and threefold brass surrounding his heart to trust a vessel in the deep ocean. Such men, with such brass armoring their hearts, begin to make themselves known in the ports of Europe, the seas of the Atlantic, and the wilderness of America. So now we will get into the larger educational and scholarly and informational ascent of the West with Arval's section of the presentation.